TaxAct knows filing taxes can be confusing, so we have live experts on hand who can help answer any questions you may have. Questions like, can I claim my SUV as my home office if I answer work emails in my car? If I adopted 12 dogs this year, can I list them as dependents? And, am I doing this right, or am I doing this very, very wrong? Our experts have the answers to those questions and many others. TaxAct. Let's get them over with.
Think Verizon is expensive? Think again. Anyone can bring their AT&T or T-Mobile bill to a Verizon store today and we'll give you a better deal. So bring us your bill. Walk in, run in, pogo stick in, teleport if you can. Ride on the back of a rollerblading yak or fly in on the wings of a majestic falcon. Any way you can, bring your AT&T or T-Mobile bill to a Verizon store today and we'll give you a better deal on the best network. Based on RootMetrics Best Overall Mobile Network Performance, U.S. second half 2025. All rights reserved. Must provide very recent postpaid consumer mobile bill in the name of the person redeeming the deal. Additional terms, conditions, and restrictions apply.
Welcome back to I Want That Too, the podcast where Disney merch meets Disney history. I'm entertainment writer Jim Hill, and as always, I'm joined by the lovely and generous Lauren Hersey, who just sent me a very cool Cars collectible.
Yeah, I saw this and I was like, Mater, this is a weird version of Mater. Jim will love it. So I sent it to you, but like I had no idea. It looks like Mater in a spaceship or something. Like, what did I actually send you?
Well, this keys off of, I want to say this is a series of shorts that showed up on Disney Plus in 2022. It's kind of, if the stories I've heard are correct, it's kind of the remains of a Cars 4 that didn't quite pan out. That's basically the conceit of this series of shorts is that Mater's sister is getting married on the East Coast. So Lightning McQueen and Mater go on a road trip across the United States. And one of the places they stop as part of this adventure is the Bonneville Salt Flats, where, of course, high-speed cars are tested all the time. So this is Mater in his going really fast outfit, and you're right. It looks very much like a spaceship.
All right. I mean, I had no idea, but I was like, this would complement Jim's Cars Easter/Christmas collection. But what was really unique about this gift was where I found it. So I've talked about on the show before that I am a cheer mom amongst other things, and my daughter's competitive cheer has me all over the place. We're going to be in Virginia Beach this weekend for nationals. Last weekend we were in Cincinnati, and we went to the Cincinnati Premium Outlets. I believe it was near Mason, Ohio, and we shopped for, like a half a day. And I was like, the only thing that could make this better is like if there was a Disney store, because we really miss them, and we've talked about that on shows. And literally, like right before we were leaving, we turned a bend, and there was not only a Disney store, but a Disney outlet. And so, of course, I'm nerding out. I'm so excited, like made my life. So I went in and I was talking to one of the cast members who was lovely. And she shared with me that, did you know that there are only 22 Disney stores left in the United States? Did you know that?
I did not. Though based on something you shared while we were pre-gaming, that may not be the case going forward, right?
Yeah. So she was saying that they were one of the original, like she was one of the original cast members, and people come from all over to shop there. Like she was saying, so this was in Ohio, and she was saying people come from as far as Canada. They will like drive there before a trip or after a trip. So super rare, but people like will drive for it. So I saw on Instagram last week that, now this is a rumor, that that under Josh D'Amaro, they might be bringing some Disney stores back. Now, not in the traditional sense, not on like every corner and every mall. So what this said was that they're thinking it's, immersive experiences, just like we've talked about that being the focus with the parks and stuff, and in select cities. So like even in the large markets, a lot of the Disney stores have been closed down. Like, we were just in Vegas, and that one, I believe, was, shut down. So I would imagine that they're looking at markets like that. They still do have the Disney store, obviously, in Times Square. There's ones in Florida and Texas, and, we have the character warehouses in Orlando. But, I mean, we want to hear from you guys. Like, would you like to see Disney stores come back? I know I would.
Yeah, I mean, and again, I'm an old fart. I remember when they were only 13, and I want to say what was cool about living in New England at the time is there was one at the Burlington Mall and there was one at the Pheasant Lane Mall just over the New Hampshire border. And they were, back in the day, they were genuinely cool.
Yeah.
Well, all right. So that's interesting, but you've also gathered some other retail-related news for this week's show?
Yeah, we have a lot to cover. So we're going to talk about some rare Epcot new nostalgic merch. Jim Henson has a new feature, and we're going to talk about a customizable twist on a classic park accessory that I love. And then in today's feature, Jim is going to be talking about how Disney went from trusting outside publishers to fiercely controlling its own storytelling after one book changed everything. So we're getting some history about Disney publishing. But before we jump into all of that, why don't we thank our sponsor?
Okay, and this episode of I Want That Too is brought to you by our friends at UnlockMagic.com, the go-to place for some of the best deals on theme park tickets. If a Disney or Universal trip is anywhere on your radar in 2026, Unlock Magic helps you lock in great ticket prices without the stress, all handled by people who really know the parks. More importantly, know how to save you money. And speaking of D23, which, by the way, Lauren and I spent entirely too much time last week, getting.
I still have PTSD.
There we go. Tickets to the expo, and thanks to Lauren and Angela for making that happen. If you're headed out to California this summer for the ultimate fan event, be sure and check out Unlock Magic before you buy your theme park tickets. And again, if you're thinking maybe this is the year we finally go, head to Unlock Magic to get the best ticket deals and make that future trip just a little more magical. Okay, so we were just talking about like the character warehouse, which I used to visit every trip down to Florida. I kind of fell out of that habit when, you'd show up and there was literally a queue to get into the character warehouse. Do you remember this?
Yeah. I mean, still, I saw a couple of pictures like a week or so ago. Like the line is wrapped around the building. Still.
Yeah. I don't know. I have to admit that kind of threw me off. But anyway, do we have any additional news here? Again, you were just talking about going to the one in Cincinnati.
I thought you were leading into you think our first story is going to end up at the character warehouse. So I have to tell you about something that I saw, and you may personally love it or not think it's strange. But so it was April Fool's Day, and Eric rolls over in bed and he says, "Hey, I sent you something. Don't believe anything you hear on the internet today because it's April Fool's." Like he was giving me the disclaimer. So later in the day, I look at, I'm like, well, what did he send me? So he sent me an article that says Disney and Crocs are partnering to make Crocs mini ear headbands. And so then I go down the rabbit hole and people are like, is this an April Fool's joke? Is this real? Whatever. Well, I can confirm via the Crocs website as of, 2 days ago that these are indeed it is not an April Fool's joke. It is real. So they are expanding their partnership, Disney and Crocs. And I mean, we've seen like all types of Disney Crocs, and like I've talked about the Disney Crocs that I've actually gotten in the theme parks and said they're more comfortable than real Crocs. But anyways, they're expanding their partnership by offering this line of headbands. And the headbands are coming out, I believe, in May. They're teasing them now, and they are $32.99, and they actually look like traditional Crocs with the rubbery, with the holes for the gibbets. And obviously, they're going to be selling the gibbet charms as a part of this so that you can customize your Minnie or Mickey ears. I would say that these are like, there could be unisex. So from what I'm seeing, there are 3 pairs with the mini bow. There's like a purple, an ice blue, and then your normal black and red. And then if you want more of the Mickey look, there's plain black and then a khaki, I guess, tan color. What do you think of these headbands, Jim?
I gotta say, as somebody, I mean, look, the thing about the gibbets, which are often very cute, very well designed, is they're on your feet, and it's just sort of like, unless you look down, look at your cool, Crocs with the gibbets on it. You don't get to see these. So I gotta say, the fact that now, the little gibbet things are up by your face where I can look at them, I can get behind this because, I liked the gibbets. I especially was always concerned when friends had gibbets on their shoes. You look down and it's like, I think you're missing one. I think you lost one as we were walking through the park. So, no, I can get behind this, and more to the point, okay, I'm glad it wasn't an April Fool's joke.
Yeah,
so.
I think they're cute. I honestly, I am team Crocs ears. I think that they're really cute. So we'll see how that goes. And if they're successful, I'm sure we will see more. Something that I do not think will end up at the Character Warehouse is this next round of shirts that they just released. I love Figment. We talk about Figment all the time. We've talked about the Dreamfinder. And so Epcot just released a couple retro Dreamfinder Figment shirts. And this is based on the classic version, Journey into Imagination. And again, $32.99 for the shirts. But they predominantly, they're featuring, the one has Dreamfinder and like I said, original version that opened in 83. They are very vintage looking, soft, and this is something that I definitely want. So I don't know if they're online yet, but if not, I'm grabbing some when I go down in July.
Okay. Cool.
Don't you know the original Dreamfinder?
Well, I mean, my pal Ron Schneider was one of, I want to say, the 3, because remember, the Dreamfinder meet and greet, they needed one every day of the week. So they were initially, I want to say, 3 gentlemen who then walked around with the Figment puppet. And by the way, the early Figment puppet was made out of, such hard plastic just to get the thing look like it was alive and moving. These poor guys would go home with hand cramps from, working that puppet that hard. I want to say they were a couple of months in when it's like, get us an easier to use Figment, please. By the way, Ron wrote a wonderful book about his time at the company. I want to say From Dreamer to Dreamfinder. My 40-year journey in themed entertainment. I think that's what it's called. But Ron Schneider, Google that, find it, buy it.
All right. Well, speaking of wonderful books, that brings us to our next little tidbit here. Did you see that there is going to be a little golden book biography of Jim Henson?
Oh, okay. I will have to chase this down. That We're building up quite the library here of golden books at the Sattler Hill home. Within the past couple of months, we picked up the Betty White book, the Gilmore Girls book, and now this Jim Henson one. When is it supposed to hit store shelves?
Yeah, so this is supposed to be released May 5th, and it's designed to introduce younger audiences to Jim Henson, obviously behind the Muppets. And I was just fascinated by this because I didn't know they had a biography series. And so, like, Jim Henson is just one of many. So there's a Golden Book biography on Dick Van Dyke, Carol Burnett, Bob Ross, Henry Winkler, Judy Garland, and Liza Minnelli so far. And this book is written and illustrated by Luke Flowers. And so it just kind of takes a look at his journey from early puppetry to then obviously like worldwide recognition. So it talks about milestones like Sesame Street, The Muppet Show, Fraggle Rock. I'm like, how long is this Golden Book? Because I mean, Jim Henson has quite the career in life, you know?
He did. And by the way, if you want to read the adult companion book to this, Brian J. Jones wrote what many consider to be the definitive book on Jim Henson's life a few years back. That's well worth reading. But no, we'll seek this one out and put it next to the Gilmore Girls and the Betty White book.
Yeah, so keep us posted if you can, get your hands on it, because I feel like it might sell out. But anyways, I think that is a perfect segue. So when we get back, Jim is going to talk to us about the history of Disney publishing. But before we go to break, I just wanted to take a minute and remind everybody that I Want That Too can be found on any podcast platform that you get your information. And we are coming up on our 100th episode as well. And we would love it if you could head over to Apple or Spotify and leave us a review and let us know what you want us to talk about on future episodes for our next 100 episodes. But first, this.
Good sleep is everything. That's why Ollie's Science Back Support is made with a blend of melatonin and L-theanine for both kiddos and grown-ups. So when your mind won't switch off, you've got something that can help. Your racing thoughts and restless nights won't stand a chance. Find Ollie Sleep Solutions for the whole family at ollie.com. That's OLLY.com.
K-pop Demon Hunters Haja Boys breakfast meal and Huntrix meal have just dropped at McDonald's. They're calling this a battle for the fans. What do you say to that, Rumi?
It's not a battle. So glad the Saja Boys could take breakfast and give our meal the rest of the day.
It is an honor to share.
No, it's our honor.
It is our larger honor.
No, really. Stop.
You can really feel the respect in this battle. Pick a meal to pick a side.
Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
At participating McDonald's while supplies last.
And we're back. Okay, so again, Lauren does her job here, which is suggest the potential topics for us to discuss for features. And this time around, Lauren was interested in hearing about Disney publishing, which, again, kind of interesting. Disney company's been around since 1923, but Disney as a publishing company has only existed, Lauren, since the 1990s. So what? 35 years and change?
Was this another Eisner thing that he was like, we could be making money?
Well, yes, this is the Michael Eisner era of the company. Though, yes, and money did enter the equation, but also there was a certain control aspect, which we'll get to later on in today's show. But again, very early on in the Disney company's history, it was easier just to license the company's characters and films to outside publishing houses. Obviously Disney had some say about how the characters were portrayed, the likenesses, and they had some trusted partners, folks they worked with for a long time. Among them was Western Publishing printing and lithography. This is a company started back in 1907, Lauren, parent company of Whitman Publishing and Simon and Schuster.
Okay.
But anyway, we've talked previously on this podcast about Kay Kamen, who was, that sort of Walt's good right arm when it came to merchandising and marketing and that sort of thing. And he's the one who signs the first contract for Disney with Western. This is back in 1933. I mean, Disney has only existed for a decade at this point, but they get the exclusive book rights to all of Disney's licensed characters, and it goes so well that by 37, Kamen negotiates an expanded version of this deal where they actually take over a magazine that Walt had started, Mickey Mouse Magazine. And over time, that then sort of reimagines itself and gets rebranded as Walt Disney's Comics and Stories. And that begins to get published in October of 1940. And Lauren, that becomes a behemoth. It becomes the highest selling comic book for its time. They were selling more than 3 million copies a month as of 1953.
Wow.
Yeah, and by the way, 1953, very significant year for Walt Disney Productions, especially its relationship with Western Publishing. Look, the Mouse had made a lot of money for this Racine, Wisconsin-based company over the past 2 decades. And now Walt was looking for a return of the favor. He hit Western Publishing up for an investment in his new project, Disneyland, that family fun park that he was going to build out there among the orange groves in Anaheim, California. And Western Publishing, to its credit, came back and offered Walt $200,000 for a 13.8% stake in the project. But what's kind of interesting, Lauren, is that Western, as part of this arrangement, they won the rights to operate the Storybook Shop on Main Street, which, by the way, sold Disney comic books. It also became the park's de facto printer when it came to press kits, guide maps, brochures, menus. So Western, for putting money into the project, was also getting money out. But Walt, at the same time, no slouch when it comes to negotiating. He included language in Disney's deal with Western Publishing that allowed him to buy out Western Publishing's shares in Disneyland, which, by the way, they did in May of 59. This is a mutually beneficial arrangement for many, many years, and which Disney would take advantage of. I mean, for example, we were just talking about 1959. That was the year that Sleeping Beauty was sent out into theaters. But Walt wanted to position that animated feature as a prestigious movie. So they turned again to Western Publishing for help, who, through their association with Simon and Schuster, they were able to get the very first art of book. In fact, this book is entitled Walt Disney, The Art of Animation, The Story of Disney Studios' Contribution to a New Art. They got that published in 1958. And by the way, this 181-page hardcover, very highly prized and sought after by Disneyana collectors. In fact, I'd been chasing one, Lauren, for damn near 40 years and finally got one like 3 years ago at Stuart Ning. And I'm not going to mention how much I paid for it. I think my first car cost less. Anyway, Western Publishing is meeting a lot of Disney's needs during this time, which is why in-house the companies really didn't discuss back in the day the idea of Disney moving into publishing. In fact, I meant to send this to you. There is this amazing flow chart that the company created back in 1961 that shows, how the various different arms of Disney work together. And what was interesting is that publishing occupied this very interesting spot in the Disney creative process overall. Like, for example, the theatrical films and TV shows that Disney produced at this time were basically seen as, well, those generate the raw materials that are then used to make comic books and books, like the Little Golden Books. And that these comic books and books then go out to the marketplace and not only create revenue for the company, but they also help to promote the individual movies and TV shows that these comic books and books are based on, and also the characters that are introduced in these comic books, published by Western Publishing. Then give the character even more characters to sell through its merchandise division. And conversely, the comic books themselves can then be collected in anthology editions and, and sold yet again. So it's a very happy relationship, Lauren, until the mid-1960s. It's around this time, again, there's enough of an age difference between myself and Lauren. I literally have to ask this question. Are you familiar with the Reader's Digest?
Yes.
Okay, cool. All right. Because I want to say that magazine went away, in the not too distant past. And, all right. Reader's Digest actually reaches out to the Walt Disney Productions in 1965. They've surveyed the readers of that monthly magazine. And by the way, at this point in its history, Reader's Digest has 23 million subscribers internationally. And of all of the Hollywood celebrities that are out there, the one that Reader's Digest subscribers most want to hear about is Walt Disney. So Reader's Digest proposes a collaboration on an authorized Walt Disney biography with the idea that Simon & Schuster and Reader's Digest would partner on this project, with Simon & Schuster publishing the book, whereas Reader's Digest would publish excerpts in its monthly magazine and help promote the thing. And what they needed to get started was to recruit a prestigious writer to interview Walt and to give this project some credibility going in. And just so you know, folks, something similar had been done back in the mid-1950s. Writer Peter Martin had interviewed Walt, then ghostwritten a series of articles for Saturday Evening Post that were then published under Diane Disney Miller's name, and then they collected those stories, expanded a bit on the material, and created a book called The Story of Walt Disney that was published in 1957. Modest success, and has been actually, ironically, published a couple of times since then by Disney Press. But anyway, Lauren, the thinking is now that it's the mid-1960s. The Walt Disney has just produced Mary Poppins, his biggest triumph. He's announced Project Florida. The guy's at the height of his success, so there is no better time to do a full-blown book for adults. So Walt tentatively agrees to this idea, and he meets in 1965 with a writer who he thinks will be good for the project, and this is Richard Schickel, who had just been made the film critic for Time magazine, and by the way, he would go on to then hold that job through 2010. So what is that? 45 years? Wow. Anyway, he'd previously written for Life magazine and the Los Angeles Book Review, so he and Walt have a sit down and they seem to hit it off. And so the plan now is that the project will get underway the following year, but then Walt gets sick and he dies in December of 66. And so Schickel comes to the Disney lot in 67 and begins interviewing people to collect material for this book, which is still going forward. But word starts to get back to Disney management that Richard seems to be asking a lot of awfully negative questions, that maybe what he's putting together isn't really the sort of book that Reader's Digest wanted. And boy, does that turn out to be the case, Lauren, when the Disney version, The Lifetime's Art and Commerce of Walt Disney, is published by Simon & Schuster in 1968. And Lauren, this book is brutal. It just it accuses Walt of taking, Grimm's fairy tales and the work of Hans Christian Andersen and, shaving off of the, all of the edges and the things that made those stories special and sort of homogenizing children's literature. It totally ruptures Disney relationship with Simon & Schuster and, by extension, Western Publishing. And so what happens next? Well, we'll discuss that after this break.
This episode is brought to you by Fandango. People say fans are too distracted these days, but the truth is, when a great movie hits the screen, you show up, you stay glued, invested, part of the story. And without fans like you, there'd be no cinema magic, no shared moments. So head to Fandango.com to get tickets, stream, or rent or buy top movies and series. Fandango loves fans.
Refreshing wild cherry cola meets smooth cream. The treat you deserve. Pepsi Wild Cherry and Cream. Treat yourself.
And we're back. Okay, we were just talking about Richard Schickel's The Disney version, which infuriates people at the Mouse House, largely because they invited him on the lot, they set him up to talk with longtime Disney employees, and this is the story he then tells, just basically sort of smearing Walt's reputation. And as a direct result, there was supposed to be this follow-up project, because again, remember, Disney Company will be celebrating its 50th anniversary in 1973, and Simon & Schuster was supposed to do a giant coffee table history book, and Disney deliberately now doesn't take that to Simon & Schuster. In fact, they take it to Harry N. Abrams, and The Art of Walt Disney from Mickey Mouse to the Magic Kingdom comes out in 1973. It's a beast of a book, Lauren. It's 448 pages, beautifully illustrated, sold really well, but Disney deliberately kept it away from Western Publishing because they felt they still felt slighted. And Simon & Schuster, Western Publishing, they try and make amends. First of all, they bring in Bob Thomas, who is the guy who actually wrote The Art of Animation, that Sleeping Beauty prestige book I mentioned earlier on in today's feature, back in 1958. They recruit Bob and say, look, we'd like to do an official Walt Disney memoir, and we want you to do, the interviewing. And Bob, Bob had worked for the Associated Press. More to the point, Bob's dad had been a publicist at Columbia, Paramount, Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, Warner Brothers. So Bob knew, how you're supposed to behave on a studio lot. And so that book, Walt Disney, an American Original, that comes out from Simon & Schuster in 1976, and it's a straight down the middle biography of Walt Disney, and it's very well received. But long story short, Lauren, Disney is still very skittish in regards to publishing. That the lesson that the company seems to have learned from the whole Disney version debacle is that Disney wants control when it comes to publishing, especially its own stories. So this is why, for example, Frank and Ollie, and I'm talking about Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnston's book, The Illusion of Life. This is published in January of 1981, but again, another situation where we're not going to go with Simon & Schuster. They actually go with Abbeville Press, and by the way, this book, Lauren, 576 pages, again, was chased by animation students forever. In fact, on the secondary market, in the late 80s, early 90s, because it was the book you wanted to have on your desk if you were an animator. People were buying copies back then for $200, $300 a piece. And this is why Disney decided that it itself would republish this book in 1995. In fact, this is what's interesting about this era in the company's history, is that Disney began to reserve the right for books about the company's history, to the effect of, by the way, because you're using our imagery and you're telling our stories, we will reserve the rights when it comes to time to republish these things, that we'll do it. And this is where I actually kind of enter this story, Lauren, because at the time I was working for a publishing house up here in New Hampshire that had won the rights to publish Van France's memoir of working for the Walt Disney Company. This book was called Window on Main Street, 35 Years of Creating Happiness at Disneyland Park. And Van, for those of you who don't know, he was the guy who set up Disneyland University. In fact, the very first guy that Van hired when it came to setting up the training of Disneyland employees was Dick Nunes, the gentleman who would eventually become, chairman of Disney Attractions Worldwide. And in fact, what was kind of interesting about this is that it was during this time when Dick was chairman of the Disney parks that Van was looking to get his book published. In fact, he initially went to Dick and said, hey, would you write the foreword? And, it's like, oh, sure, I'd love to help my old boss, but let me read the book first. And Dick read the book and then came back to Van and said, all right, here's the deal. I will write the foreword, and I will arrange that this book is on sale inside of the Disney parks. So you're guaranteed a number of sales. However, in exchange for that, here is a list of stories I need you to cut out of that book. In fact, a third of the book wound up being cut because Dick Dick didn't want the real story of what Disneyland was like in 55, 56, 57 out there when they were still learning how to run the place. And Van caved. In fact, I've got a copy of the original manuscript here at the house with all of those amazing stories about those early days. But that was the reality. Disney, at this point, began to very avidly protect its reputation, especially when it came to the company's founder. And what was kind of the 1-2 punch of this situation is, again, Windows on Main Street gets published in 91. In 1993, we get Walt Disney Hollywood's Dark Prince, which is written by Mark Elliott, which shares a lot of really kind of unsavory stories about Walt, lots of allegedly, reportedly, supposedly stuff, Lauren, and what's interesting about this book is Walt's daughter, Diane Disney Miller, is so upset by what this book says about her dad. This is what sets the whole Walt Disney Family Museum project, the thing that got put or built up in the Presidio, she built an entire museum to basically as a counter argument to Mark Elliott's book. But anyway, Disney, again, the takeaway from this whole situation is, as Lauren mentioned earlier on in today's show, Michael Eisner looked at publishing and said, that looks like something we could make money off of. But also, if we step into this space, we can have control. So Hyperion Press gets launched in the early 90s. In fact, one of the very first books they do, Lauren, is Disney's Art of Animation, once again by Bob Thomas, the gentleman who wrote the Sleeping Beauty Prestige book back in 58. But what's interesting is they update all of that material now to help promote Disney's newest animated feature, which is Beauty and the Beast. It's an interesting time for Disney publishing. They face a lot of challenges. For example, during the same window of time, John Culhane writes, it's Aladdin, the making of an animated film. This gets published by Hyperion in 1992, out ahead of the Aladdin movie. But do you remember how Robin Williams, as one of the conditions to voicing the genie, actually insisted that his name not be used in promotion of the movie? Do you remember that at all, Lauren?
Yes, I remember that story. I do.
Okay, well, this is what makes this book very interesting to read today, because you will get to sections of the book where they talk about the genie, and they never actually mention Robin Williams' name. You know, it's just the performer who voices the genie.
That's so weird.
Yeah, it was weird. But during this window of time, a lot of folks who were writing books about Disney just realized that, look, if you want to be able to tell stories that the company doesn't necessarily want you to tell, you're going to have to publish your book on your own, which is why, for example, how we got the Nickel Tour from David Mumford and Bruce Gordon. This is a postcard journey through 40 years of history of the happiest place on earth. David and Bruce had to set up their own publishing house, Camphor Tree Publishing, and Bruce named that after a beautiful tree in the parking lot of his apartment building. But that comes out in January of 95. And Mindy Johnson, as recently as September of 2017, she's talked about her Ink and Paint, the Women of Disney animation book, and that was published by Disney Press. But Mindy has talked about the fact that in order to get that book published by Disney, some of her favorite stories of the, working at Disney in the 40s, 50s, and 60s had to be cut. And sometimes Disney plays hardball, Lauren. For example, Amidi had written a full biography of Ward Kimball, Disney legend. It was entitled Full Steam Ahead, The Life and Art of Ward Kimball. It was supposed to be published by Chronicle Books in 2013. And Chronicle Books, by the way, are the folks who do all of the amazing art of books for the Pixar films. And what was interesting is that back in the day, flat out said that Chronicle backed out of the project from pressure from Disney because, again, he was telling stories about Ward Kimball that the company didn't necessarily want out there. And just last year, Amit announced a revised version of this book called If It Ain't Fun, To Hell With It, Ward Kimball's Adventures in Disney, Jazz, Trains, and the Avant-Garde. Was supposed to be published, this year, 2026. And so far, Lauren, not seeing any word about that. Again, I've been waiting on this book now for almost 15 years. But anyway, again, we got the Bob Thomas book about Walt Disney, and it's worth noting 20 years ago, we got Neil Gabler's wonderful Walt Disney, The Triumph of American Imagination, that was published by Vintage. I mean, it's a doorstop of a book, Lauren. It's 912 pages.
Oh, my gosh.
But it's well worth reading. I mean, it's an amazing book about Walt. And what's interesting is Neil even has nice things to say about Richard Schickel's book. He argues that, Richard was negative, but there's stories in there that you don't hear anywhere else. So I guess to bring this full circle, Lauren, is, look, we're all adults here. And, and more to the point, Walt Disney was a living, breathing human being with virtues and flaws. And I argue you have to read everything you can about the guy. So I've read, the Schickel book. I've read the Eliot. I've read the Gabler. When you combine all of those books, you get a fully rounded picture of who Walt Disney was. But at the same time, you have the modern Disney company that is very protective of Walt Disney. And in fact has, for lack of a better term, they've covered the man in shellac.
Yeah. And I mean, that's the challenge whenever, Disney is trying to control the message is like people want to hear the real stories, like warts and all, because I mean, that is real, that is human.
Yep.
So, I mean, it does not surprise me that they wanted to control what got put out. I mean, at the end of the day, Disney is still a company. But thank you for sharing such a great story in history. I know we have a friend of the show that has asked several times why Disney hasn't had their own bookstore, even though they have publishing. So maybe we'll answer that on a future episode.
By the way, just a quick note before we close up shop here, and we were just talking about the D23 Expo, and I want to actually voice my concern over the fact that this time around at the expo, Disney Press is not going to be represented. There will not be a bookstore on the floor, which, by the way, is where you could go and get, your books autographed by the authors, the Tim O'Days of the world.
You could get a shot of Joffrey's coffee.
Yeah, you could. And, it's kind of frustrating to me. That's one of the reasons I actually go to the D23 Expo. I like picking up my books, 5 or 6 weeks before they hit store shelves. So, I think this is very short-sighted on the D23 people's part, to prevent, no bookstore this time around. Not a good idea. But anyway, on that note, Lauren, me being a grumpy old man, I guess we should wrap up this week's episode of I Want That.
We'll close up shop before Jim says anything else.
There we go. All right. And by the way, if you want to keep up on everything happening across the Jim Hill Media Podcast Network, follow us on social, and don't forget to check out our Patreon for bonus shows and early access.
Yes, and like I said earlier in the show, we love to hear from you, so send us your ideas for future episodes. Jim is at Jim Hill Media, and I'm at Lauren at laurenhersey.com. And that does it for today's show. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on I Want That Too.